cool. So I'm going to switch back over to my big cam. Hello again. And I'm going to take some questions if there's anything out there. I'm going to switch over to my question board. What do you have in your master chain? I don't think anything very, very exciting. Oh, I have another version of the same effects rack that I built. I have some stuff that's disabled. I normally put a limiter on the end of everything, and I'm very careful to not like really go into smashing this. I just try to keep some dynamic range, and I always try to keep a good amount of headroom actually in live itself, and then turn up the audio interface so that I have room to kind of expand if I need to. I've got kind of a EQ set up here, which I find important. I like to get a sound check beforehand, and I use an EQ to kind of dial in the room and roll off the low frequencies, and normally dip some of the harsher type of mid frequencies, especially for stuff that's kind of trying to get more of a disco smile kind of feel. I mean, normally everything's pretty dialed in beforehand, and this EQ is just for the room itself and making those type of on-the-fly adjustments. Uh, I like using a multi-band compressor from time to time too, which kind of just once again allows me to select my lows, mids, and highs and dial in some adjustments for those, add different amounts of compression as needed. Once again, this is just kind of to compensate for the speakers, the room, but you have to also be careful during sound check because you'll be sound checking in an empty room, and then you'll have a bunch of people in the room, and that will actually change the way the room sounds. So you need to be careful with how much of that you actually apply. But the good thing is you always have the ability to modify it as you go along. And then normally just maybe some performance effects that I use to kind of work with on the master. I'm not exactly sure once again what I had with the fab filter, but that was probably something EQ related where I was doing stuff in real time with that, and then just having some basic effects that I would use to kind of affect everything overall. But yeah, feel free to explore that option and go easy with the dynamics processing and leave yourself lots of headroom. I guess that's my biggest amount of advice. Marking questions. Next one. What's the max CPU load that you feel safe using while performing live? I'm a daredevil. I'm always pushing the limits of my system. I have a pretty fast computer. I have like a 2015 i7 core, and I'm still maxing that out. It's not so much about like what it is consistently. I find that I can run it like up to 50% and still be kind of safe, but it's the spikes that occur, CPU spikes that are the worrisome things that can happen. Yeah, I have things sometimes like my processor just starts to crackle and disintegrate, and sometimes that's audible. And then, buffer settings end up coming into play where you have to really manage those. And then that comes to a balancing act where you're battling like latency versus processing power, which is another thing that you kind of have to struggle with. But a function that's really important is this option under delay compensation, which is this reduced latency when monitoring. So anything that you have as an input monitor, input monitorable, I don't know how to say that. Anything that's being input monitored is able to get reduced. So even if you do boost up your buffer, you can still have that particular track. So if I have a vocal mic, for example, or if I'm running a guitar live, or if I'm just playing these instruments here and triggering them, I don't want the latency. So anything that's getting armed for input monitoring is going to have that reduced latency applied to it. So that's a cool trick. Otherwise, you have to push the limit sometimes, and that's that's unavoidable. But obviously, you want to keep it down to the bare minimum in terms of what your processor is actually taking up. So hopefully that answers that question. I'm gonna cross that one off. How do you make adjustments to your buffer settings to improve system performance for robustness? Yes. Okay. So if you go to your audio preferences, that's done through the buffer settings here. And this is normally dependent upon your sound card settings, but they're basically measured in binary amounts: 32, 64, 128, 256, 512, 124, 2048 samples. So the object is to keep this as low as possible without getting your CPU crazy. So start with it at a lower setting and then work your way up. Um, so if you start having issues, I normally start around 64 samples and then just see where that takes me to on my CPU. But you can see that it did jump up a percentage. And this will keep any of your tasks that are, uh, you know, related to speed and agility with your system down to a minimum. For drummers, this is kind of a nightmare because if you're trying to play live drums, they need it way down here. But at the same time, that kind of I would build a setup just for actually playing drums because, I know drummers that can feel things lower than 7 milliseconds. Maybe they can't hear it, but ah, sorry, y'all. Let me show my screen. My bad. Um, I have too many controls. Once again, too many buttons, which is the theme. So the buffer setting is measured under the audio tab here. Buffer settings. Here's where you set that. So once again, start setting it at a lower value and then work your way up as you need more processing. Just don't jump all the way up to the max because you're going to miss out on all the goodness that these could provide. And as your setup keeps growing, then you need to expand this, once again measuring against the delay compensation. You guys can see my screen again. That's good. I'll get rid of that. Do I like using iOS apps a lot when performing live? It is really funny, but I do not own an iPad. I've never owned an iPad. I haven't really been convinced by needing another screen. I'm trying to avoid that. But I have set up setups for other artists that use all different types of iOS apps. And I think with Link now available, I think it's amazing. And the new function that Ableton came out with, which basically allows you to take content from your mobile devices and end up directly importing that into live. I can really see the benefit there. I think they're awesome. I think there's a lot of potential there. I see the potential in a lot of other people's setups, but for me, the biggest kind of benefit of that was being able to walk away from my computer, stand off stage and control things while I'm doing sound check. I thought that was pretty beneficial. Probably something that I'll get into hopefully in the near future because some companies are hitting me up to check out some of their awesome software. But once again, I need to just kind of cough up and buy the iPad. Unless somebody has one they want to donate to me, I'm always open to that. Good questions.